Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we descend into the high country of California's Sierra Nevada range during one of the harshest winters on record. The winter of 1978 brought isolation that turned small ranger stations into islands, and silence into something that could be felt. What emerged from those months were radio transmissions that would never be fully explained. Across snowbound peaks and frozen valleys are accounts drawn from Forest Service archives, incident reports, and recorded dispatch logs. Each one verified, documented, and preserved exactly as it was reported. The calls came in the dead hours. Some were answered. Others simply ended. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was the second week of January, 1978. The kind of winter that locals in the Sierra would recall decades later as the one that buried trucks up to their mirrors and turned trail markers into vague bumps under fields of white. At Deadwood Creek, elevation 7,200 feet, that winter arrived early and stayed without mercy. By the 8th of the month, the pass leading to the station had closed under 12 feet of accumulation. The only access was by snowmobile from the supply depot 26 miles south. Even then, travel was determined almost entirely by weather windows and the cooperation or indifference of the mountain itself. Ranger Thomas Welker, 41, had taken the Deadwood post 3 seasons in a row. His personnel file described him as methodical, quiet, and unusually suited to isolated assignments. Before transferring to the Forest Service, he had spent a decade in the Navy as an avionics technician. Supervisors noted he showed no signs of stress from solitary duty. In fact, he seemed to function better when removed from the bustle of district operations. Self-contained, one of his evaluations read, reliable, prefers structure, prefers routine. His file contained no disciplinary marks, no medical red flags beyond a mild allergy to ragweed. Nothing unusual. The station itself was a squat A-frame cabin with a reinforced roof designed to withstand heavy snow loads. It contained a wood stove, a small kitchenette, a cot, 2 radios, and shelves of equipment. Welker kept it neat. His logs from previous seasons showed consistent handwriting, neat block letters, and detailed observations. A man comfortable with order. The supply drop scheduled for January 12th had been delayed 4 days due to a series of storms that rolled across the Sierra in succession, collapsing drive time estimates and grounding the Department S helicopter for 78 hours. Welker had acknowledged the delay without complaint during his check-ins, noting he still had enough provisions. He had cut his fuel usage to half to compensate for the late drop. On the 16th, weather broke just long enough for a single snowmobile to reach him. The operator reported that Welker seemed tired, nothing alarming, only the kind of fatigue that comes from too many days of cold and too little sleep, but otherwise normal. He accepted the supplies, reviewed the manifest, signed the form, and joked about the coffee rations being lighter than usual. Nothing stood out. At 1400 hours that same day, dispatcher Carol Hendricks received a transmission that would later become the foundation of incident file S7801A. Her notes described Welker's voice as strained but composed, with long pauses not typical for him. The radio interference present during the call was odd static rising and falling inconsistently, not tied to weather readings at her location or his. More like intermittent pressure on the signal, as if something large were passing between his antenna and the horizon. Welker began the call with a simple statement. "Dispatch, this is Deadwood Creek. I need to report something unusual." Hendricks responded with standard acknowledgement. No urgency yet, no alarm. Welker continued. He spoke slowly, which she attributed at first to the cold or to him choosing his words carefully. He described tracks outside the station. They had appeared sometime between 0300 hours, when he heard movement on the roof and first light. He had assumed the roof noises were snow shifting, but the timing troubled him. Snow load cracks typically aligned with wind bursts or temperature changes. He had logged neither at that hour. When he went outside at dawn, he found the snow around the building disturbed in a pattern that did not match any wildlife common to the region. He described the track line as bipedal, but with a stride length inconsistent with human locomotion too long. The depth of each impression suggested significant mass, but the powder had concealed any clear edges. Importantly, he noted an absence of drag marks, no sign of equipment, sleds, or snowshoes. The tracks circled the cabin 4 times, not wandering, not following a scent, a deliberate perimeter. After circling, the tracks moved toward the creek bed. And then, abruptly, they stopped. No prints beyond the last step. No indication of retreat. No indication of the individual moving onto harder terrain or into trees. The creek was frozen solid, but even a cautious step on the ice would have left some mark, a hairline crack, a scuff, a displacement of powder. There was nothing. Hendricks asked if he had seen any vehicles or aircraft overnight. He said no. She asked if he wanted a welfare check. Welker paused for nearly half a minute. The gap is recorded in the audio. She later said that she expected him to ask for assistance. Instead, he replied, "Negative. I am fine, just logging it." The transmission ended a moment later. Welker's voice was steady, but the final seconds of the recording contained the detail that would later prompt further review. A low rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, faint but discernible beneath the static. Hendricks assumed it was wind interference at the time. She scheduled his routine 1800 hours check-in. That check-in never came. At 18:15, Hendricks initiated contact. No response. She tried again at 18:30. Nothing. Over the next 2 hours, she attempted 6 additional calls. No reply. At 2100 hours, she escalated to her supervisor, Martin Kress, who authorized a response the moment weather permitted. The window didn't open until the 18th. A 2-man team departed on snowmobiles at 0800, reaching Deadwood Creek shortly after 10. The scene was described as undisturbed, quiet, consistent with deep winter wilderness. The station door was closed, but not locked. Inside, the stove had gone cold. The thermometer read 33 degrees. Welker's cot was neatly made. His journal lay open on the desk, last entry dated the 16th, containing routine weather notes, barometric pressure, wind velocity, snowfall predictions. No mention of tracks. His gear inventory was intact. His boots were placed by the door. His heavy Forest Service jacket was not hanging on its peg. Instead, it lay outside, neatly arranged on the porch alongside his pack and snowshoes. The placement was deliberate, as if staged for departure. But the boots remained inside. Welker had not dressed for travel. The radio was on. Channel 7. The microphone rested in its cradle aligned, not dropped carelessly. The response team noted this repeatedly. Mic replaced intentionally. Outside, the team found the tracks Welker had described, though partially degraded by wind. The stride lengths varied between 41 and 48 inches longer than Welker's 6-foot frame could produce even with snowshoes. The impressions were deeper than expected, considering the powder and temperature conditions. No toe or heel definition, no drag. They circled the cabin 4 times. On the north side, where wind had been gentler under the eaves, the tracks were preserved well enough to show symmetrical spacing. The track line tapered toward the creek. And then, just as Welker had said, it ended abruptly. The team conducted a grid search with a half-mile radius. No sign of Welker. No broken tree limbs, no signs of predation, no avalanche indicators. Snowmobile tracks from the supply drop were present. Everything else was natural, undisturbed terrain. Back inside, the team cataloged the station thoroughly. Welker's watch was on the table. His gloves were on the counter. His personal notebook, separate from his duty journal, contained crossword puzzles, a few letters he never mailed, and a list of books he wanted to read. Nothing in the notebook suggested distress or paranoia. No coded notes, no references to visitors. They checked the roof. Snow load consistent, no unusual indentations. They checked the eaves. No signs of deliberate tampering. They checked the woodpile. Half depleted, normal for that stage of winter. The most unusual detail remained the arrangement of items on the porch. Staged was the term used in the official report. His jacket folded at the sleeves, his snowshoes placed parallel, his pack zipped and leaning against the rail as if awaiting its owner. The theory that Welker staged them himself was weakened by the fact that his boots essential for leaving the cabin remained by the door, untouched. The laces were still tied the way he always tied them. By 1400 hours, the team declared the station secure and initiated the missing ranger protocol. A broader team conducted an expanded search over 2 days. Nothing found. No sign of struggle. No blood. No tracks beyond the anomalous ones. The creek bed revealed no cracks or depressions. No prints crossing to the other side. Welker had vanished in conditions where even a squirrel left visible marks. The recording of his final transmission was reviewed the following week. It was then that the detail in the last 10 seconds, the faint breathing, became a subject of discussion. Audio technicians attempted to isolate it. Some believed it was interference. Others, including Hendricks, maintained that it did not match known static patterns. The file ultimately concluded Ranger missing, presumed deceased. But the case was left open. Deadwood Creek Station was decommissioned the following year. Official reasoning cited difficult access and resource reallocation. Unofficially, several rangers requested not to be assigned there. Today, the structure still stands, weathered, roof sagging under decades of snowfall. Hikers occasionally pass within a half-mile, but most avoid the area. Locals mention the story of the ranger who vanished without leaving a single footprint away from his own front door. And in some circles, mostly rangers. Mostly those who work the higher elevations, the phrase "Deadwood tracks" is still used quietly when something doesn't fit. When evidence stops where it shouldn't, or when a welfare check goes unanswered longer than comfort allows. It was January 23rd, 1978. A day remembered in the Echo Summit district for a storm cell that moved faster than forecast models predicted, dumping nearly 18 inches of dense, wind-compacted snow in a span of 6 hours. Roads closed by mid-afternoon. Chains were irrelevant. Visibility collapsed to zero in places. The cold behind the storm front arrived like a wall, sharp, immediate, and unforgiving. Wind chill dropped into the negatives even before sunset. Ranger David Marsh, 36, was assigned to overnight patrol along the closed portion of Highway 50. Marsh had a reputation within the district. Steady temperament, background in the Army, 2 commendations for SAR, search and rescue work, and a habit of approaching problems with a calm practicality that made him reliable in situations that rattled others. Supervisors described him as unflappable. Co-workers joked that if they ever saw Marsh panicked, they'd know it was time to run. His route covered roughly 12 miles of highway, including 2 emergency shelters built after the blizzard of '72. The shelters were little more than reinforced rest-stop structures, small, windowless rooms stocked with blankets, first aid kits, and canned rations. Their purpose was simple: give stranded motorists a chance at survival if they became trapped. On the night of the 23rd, Marsh left the main station at 1900 hours in a Snowcat, a wide-tread, enclosed cab vehicle capable of traversing deep snowpack without sinking. He logged the vehicle number, fuel level, and expected return time. His handwriting in the logbook was neat, slightly slanted to the right, consistent with all his entries from previous months. The storm had passed, leaving the sky startlingly clear. Under the half-moon, the mountains reflected a cold, blue-white luminescence. Marsh radio dispatch at 19:15. Visibility good. Road surface hardpack. Beginning sweep. Dispatcher Alan Boyce acknowledged. The radio logs for that night show nothing unusual in their exchange. Marsh reached the first emergency shelter at 1945. He inspected the door, the latch, and the supply crates inside. Everything was intact. A light dusting of snow had infiltrated the entryway, which he swept out of habit. His brief report to Boyce Shelter 1 clear registered with no hint of tension. From there, he proceeded south toward the second shelter. The Snowcat's treads clattered against the frozen surface, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. The wind had died entirely. Marsh later described the silence in his log tape recorder, standard issue for solo patrols, as unnatural. The district had no animals recorded in winter surveys for that area, no deer, no bear, no mountain lions, none of the usual signs of life. Too much snow, too little food. The mountains were dormant. At 2000 hours, Boyce received a transmission. The recording begins with the steady hum of the Snowcat engine. Then Marsh's voice, calm but with an undercurrent Boyce later described as focused confusion. Dispatch. I've got a situation here. There's someone on the road. Boyce asked for clarification. The highway was closed. Gates locked at both ends. No authorized vehicles were out. Marsh confirmed. I am looking at them right now, about 200 yards ahead, standing in the middle of the road. They were not moving. He adjusted the Snowcat's spotlight. The beam cut across the white surface and illuminated the bend in the road ahead. No reflective material visible on the figure, no vehicle, no tracks. Boyce asked whether it could be a stranded motorist who bypassed the gate. Marsh answered with a long exhale picked up by the mic. Doesn't it look like that? He slowed the Snowcat to a crawl, sounding the horn in 3 long bursts, set the universal signal for alerting wildlife and non-responsive persons. The figure remained motionless. Marsh brought the Snowcat to a stop and reported, I am going to approach on foot. Boyce immediately recommended against it. Standard procedure. Wait, assess from a distance, radio for backup if necessary. Marsh had already opened the cab door. The recording captures the sudden rush of wind and the shuffle of boots on metal steps. The door shuts. Then silence, except for Marsh's rhythmic breathing over the mic clipped to his jacket. He walked forward. 90 seconds of steady crunching footfalls. No hesitation. Marsh's training never abandoned him. His breathing stayed even, controlled. Then, there's nothing here. Marsh's voice dropped to a near whisper. He described the location. The figure had been standing at a point where the road curved around an outcropping, an open stretch with high snowbanks on either side. He scanned the area with his flashlight. No footprints, no depressions, no sign of human presence. The surface was smooth, unbroken beyond his own tracks leading from the Snowcat. His next words were slower, as if processing the situation in real time. Dispatch. I am looking at the snow. It's as smooth. No one was here. I don't understand. He returned to the Snowcat at 2012 hours and reported that he would continue to the second shelter. He arrived there at 2100. Shelter 2 clear, he noted. Nothing unusual. No tracks. No weather anomalies. No signs of avalanche danger. His tone during this final routine check-in is neutral, almost overly composed, as if he was choosing to put the earlier incident behind him, at least long enough to complete his duties. At 22:15, Boyce attempted to raise Marsh for a scheduled check-in. No response. He tried again 10 minutes later. Silence. He tried at 22:45, then 2300. Nothing. The frequency remained unnervingly clear, no static, no interference, just absence. Boyce continued attempts until 0300, logging each one. At 0600 per protocol, a recovery team was dispatched. The Snowcat was found at 2300 hours on the 24th, parked neatly on the shoulder near the midpoint of Marsh's patrol route. Engine off, lights off, no external damage. Snow accumulation suggested it had been stationary since late the previous night. The cab was locked from the inside. Through the window, Marsh was visible in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, posture upright, eyes open. His expression was described as neutral, not distressed, not peaceful, simply fixed. Rescuers broke a side window. Marsh did not respond to verbal commands or physical stimuli. He exhibited no signs of struggle or injury. His body temperature was 74 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with prolonged exposure to cold, but not consistent with the environment inside the cab, which was insulated. The heater had not been running. Even without the heater, the cab should have retained more warmth. There were no signs of hypothermic shivering, no muscle rigidity, no frostbite, no cold-related skin marbling. His clothing was completely dry. The medical examiner later noted in his report, body presence with hypothermic core temperature, but no peripheral indicators. Inconsistent profile. Cause of death listed as hypothermia pending further review. The Snowcat-S systems were tested. No carbon monoxide leakage, no engine malfunction. Dashboard indicators all normal. Inside the cab, everything was orderly. Marsh's gloves were on the console. His field report notebook sat open to a blank page. The keys were in the ignition, but turned off. A small amount of frost had formed on the inside of the windshield, more than expected given the insulation, but not impossible. One detail stood out, documented in 3 separate reports due to how unusual it was. On the passenger seat, Marsh's radio microphone lay carefully coiled, the cord wrapped neatly, resting as if he had placed it there with intention. Marsh was meticulous, but he never coiled the mic during active patrol. He usually left it hanging for immediate access. The recovery team conducted a larger search around the site. No tracks beyond their own, no sign of another human presence, no wildlife, no vehicle, no anomalies in the snow. Interviews with personnel who knew Marsh did not reveal stressors, medical conditions, or recent behavioral changes. His last medical exam was normal. His Christmas break logs were routine. He had spoken to his sister 2 days before the assignment, reporting nothing unusual. The footage from the Snowcat-S mounted spotlight camera was reviewed. The tape ended before the incident occurred, overwritten during routine use. The Vehicle S audio recorder captured nothing beyond what was transmitted to dispatch. The official conclusion, hypothermia in a sealed environment, never satisfied anyone familiar with the case. Unofficially, among Rangers, a different sentiment persisted. Marsh had encountered something that should have left tracks, but didn't he? Something that stood in the open, visible under a spotlight, then disappeared without disturbing a single inch of snow. Something that drew him out of the Snowcat, then left him locked inside, hands positioned neatly, mic coiled, body temperature impossibly low. Patrol guidelines were amended later that year. Solo night patrols on closed highway sections were quietly discontinued. The highway remains in service today, plowed, salted, and lined with modern avalanche sensors. Thousands drive it every week. But Rangers know. Some stretches of road remember. and some incidents never settle neatly into paperwork. It was February 1st, 1978, a date that would later be marked in the Granite Peak District logs with a small pencil line, a private notation made by a supervisor who didn't want to commit anything stronger to paper. Winter that year had been unusually cold, but almost unnaturally dry following a parched autumn. The district had received funding for extended winter staffing of select fire lookouts, an experiment meant to study winter atmospheric patterns and early year risk prediction. Most lookouts declined the assignment. Only 3 accepted. One of them was Rebecca Hale, 53, a retired schoolteacher who had spent 6 summers working at Granite Peak Tower. She was known for patience, thoroughness, and a calm, almost preternatural ability to remain composed during lightning events, equipment failures, and long stretches of isolation. Her evaluations were consistently outstanding. She logged meticulously, reading the land like a second language. Granite Peak Tower sat at 6,100 feet, perched on a rocky prominence that offered uninterrupted 360-degree views of the surrounding national forest. The nearest maintained trail lay 4 miles to the south. No roads serviced the tower. Helicopter access was possible but weather-dependent. Winter staffing was rare because the area was notorious for avalanches that could cut off all approach for weeks. Hale arrived on January 15th. She carried 2 duffel bags, 1 collapsible crate of personal reading materials, and a thermos her niece had given her for Christmas. She logged her arrival time at 1420 hours and conducted a full equipment check. Solar panels, operational. Backup generator, fueled and functional. Radio, clear on both routine and emergency frequencies. Her daily logs for mid-January reflected ordinary conditions, cold nights, light wind, minimal wildlife. Her notes remained precise but emotionally neutral. She recorded everything: wind speed, barometric pressure, visibility, forest moisture, passing clouds, her own sleep schedule. Her entries were cleanly written, no deviations from prior seasons. By the end of January, the temperatures had dropped into single digits at night. Hale adjusted accordingly, reducing generator usage to conserve fuel. She stacked wood inside the tower, ensuring she had enough to last through any multi-day weather lock-in. When asked during a routine call if the isolation bothered her in winter, she said that she found it quiet in a different way, not unpleasant, simply requiring more discipline. On February 1st, the temperature at Granite Peak had fallen to -3 degrees by late evening. Hale's 1800 radio check-in was routine. She noted decreasing wind, stable atmospheric pressure, and the possibility of hoarfrost formation by dawn. She had eaten a light dinner and planned to sleep early. Then she saw the light. The tower's west-facing windows looked out over an expanse of national forest, dense stands of conifers, ridgelines, and valleys with no human habitation for miles. At 2200 hours, Hale noticed a faint illumination moving through the tree line below. At first, she assumed moonlight catching on exposed rock. But the light moved, slow, deliberate, steady. Hale retrieved her binoculars, a pair rated for low-light observation. She adjusted the focus and confirmed what she was seeing. A single light source, bright and cold white, traveling horizontally at an elevation she estimated to be around 5,800 feet. She recorded an immediate note in her logbook. Light sighted WSW, steady movement, approx. 1.2 miles out. Not lantern, not vehicle. She watched for 20 minutes. The light did not sway or bob the way a handheld source would. It maintained a constant altitude that did not follow the rising and falling terrain. It passed behind dense stands of fir and re-emerged on the other side without deviation. No sound accompanied it, not an engine, not wind displacement, nothing. Her next action followed protocol. She attempted radio contact with the district station. After-hours calls went directly to the emergency operator. Linda Torres answered on the third attempt. Torres would later state that Hale sounded steady, not frightened, not excited, just certain. Hale described the light. Torres asked if a search and rescue operation was underway. Hale corrected her. SR alerts were 0 for the district. No hikers, no missing persons, and no known aircraft in the vicinity. Her exact words, "If it's a person, they are moving too fast." And the light, it's wrong for a handheld. Torres kept the line open. For the next several minutes, Hale narrated what she observed with the clarity of someone trained to document environmental anomalies. The light continued on its westward trajectory, cutting through the forest in a straight, unbroken line. Then, at approximately 22:35, it stopped. Hale's breathing changed, slightly picked up by the radio but kept under control. She said, "It is stationary now, holding position." For 5 minutes, the light did not move. The forest below remained still. No animals stirred. No branch cracked. Then the light began to ascend, not along a slope, not drifting upward. It rose vertically, at a measured pace, in complete silence. Hale narrated, "It's climbing, rate of ascent steady, not aircraft, no sound." Torres asked if it could be a flare. Hale dismissed the possibility immediately. Flares flicker, flares arc, flares decay. This light remained stable, cohesive, and unnervingly constant. It rose for approximately 30 seconds, then blinked out. Not gradually, instantly, as though someone had flipped a switch. Hale scanned the sky and valley for an hour after the disappearance. Nothing. No additional light. No motion. No residual glow or ember. The wilderness returned to its original silence. At 23:45, she gave a final summary to Torres and ended the transmission. The next morning, Hale requested permission to hike the area. Her request was denied. Avalanche risk had increased due to drop in overnight temperatures and accumulation of wind-loaded snow on west-facing slopes. Instead, a 2-person team was dispatched on February 4th during a brief stable weather window. The team consisted of Ranger Evan Morrissey and technician Helen Royce, both experienced in winter terrain navigation. They reached Hale's coordinates after a strenuous 3-hour trek. Snow depth varied from waist-high to nearly impassable drifts. Temperature readings ranged between 7 and 10 degrees. At the approximate location where Hale observed the stationary light, they found a clearing. The clearing measured roughly 50 feet in diameter. Snow within it was compressed uniformly, forming a smooth, shallow depression approximately 1 inch lower than surrounding snowpack. The surface was unbroken, no markings, no footprints, no drag lines, no evidence of mechanical equipment. Morrissey logged, "Area appears disturbed by weight or pressure, but patternless. Circular. No sign of human passage, no natural explanation." Royce described the surface as unnatural, though the official report later replaced that word with unexplained. They examined nearby trees. No scorch marks, no broken branches, no melted snow, no signs of animals bedding. The clearing presented a paradox, an area affected by force, but lacking any trace of the force's origin or direction. The team photographed the site using a district-issued Polaroid. The images captured only a flat, featureless circle. When the team returned to Granite Peak, they debriefed Hale. She listened quietly, nodding once when they confirmed the clearing matched the location of the light's pause and ascent. She asked no questions. Her logs for the days following the incident maintained their regular cadence: weather, visibility, wind direction. No additional anomalies. No mention of the light again. Her handwriting remained steady, unchanged. On February 12th, Hale submitted notice that she did not wish to participate in winter staffing the following year. When asked during her exit interview why, she answered, "The summers are enough for me now." Granite Peak Tower continued limited operations until early 1983, when winter staffing was suspended and summer staffing reduced due to budget cuts. The tower was officially decommissioned later that year. The solar panels were removed, radio equipment salvaged. Only the structure remained. Hikers report that the tower still stands, though leaning slightly to the east. The stairs creak. The observation windows rattle in wind. The lower hatch is sometimes buried under drifts late into June. Those who camp near the base of the peak occasionally describe an unusual quietness, heavy, pressure-like, charged, depending on the person. No wildlife frequents the clearing below, though the region supports deer and small mammals. A few have mentioned seeing a faint glimmer through the trees on windless nights, though nothing that stayed long enough to document. Most dismiss it. Some don T. The district does not acknowledge any ongoing significance to the location. But the old file G7802 still sits in the archives. And in the margins of the duplicate copy, in light pencil, an unnamed supervisor once wrote, "If reported exactly as seen, the implications are beyond our scope. It was February 9th, 1978. One of those brittle winter days at Carson Pass where sound traveled oddly far and the cold seemed to thin the air. The ranger station stood at an elevation just shy of 8,000 feet, perched near the crest of the pass, like a solitary outpost between two worlds, the western slope, with its wet storms and dense forests, and the eastern basin, where the land opened into high desert. Winter activity dropped to almost nothing by January, leaving the station largely quiet, except for occasional skiers and the weekly supply delivery. Ranger Joel Pritchard, 29, had the afternoon shift. His personnel file described him as attentive, orderly, dependable. He favored clear, precise logs and had a reputation among his peers for noticing things others missed. Small inconsistencies, slight deviations from standard patterns, anything that fell outside routine. He'd been assigned to Carson Pass for 2 years, long enough to know every creak of the building, every quirk of the old phone system, and every change in the wind. The station closed to the public at 1600 hours each day during winter. Doors locked, lights off except for the porch lamp. Only 2 rangers staffed the site during daylight, one in the front office, one maintaining equipment. Communication with the district office 20 miles west was mostly by radio. The station's landline was functional, but rarely used. The number was in T, publicly listed, and winter recreationists seldom needed it. So when the phone rang at precisely 1500 hours, Pritchard was surprised enough that he logged the time even before lifting the receiver. He answered with the standard greeting. For 10 seconds, there was no voice, only a faint sound that at first resembled static, but carried a rhythm inconsistent with electrical interference. He later described it as breathing through cloth, slow and deliberate, as if the caller was standing close to the receiver but had not yet spoken. Then the line went dead. No click, no tone, just silence. Pritchard logged the call, checked the phone connection, and went back to paperwork, maintenance reports, trail condition summaries, and snowpack notes. At 15:20, the phone rang again. This time, there was a voice. Male, distant, as though speaking through layers of interference, or as if the signal was traveling from an unstable connection far outside the normal range of landline transmission. The words were distorted, similar consonant patterns, rising intonation, but not enough clarity for meaning. Pritchard asked the caller to repeat, The voice continued, urgent, strained, almost desperate in tone, but the content remained indistinguishable. After 8 seconds, the line cut out mid-syllable. He recorded the second call in the logbook. By 1600 hours, the phone had rung 6 more times. Each call lasted between 4 and 12 seconds. Each contained some blend of static, faint background, hum, or voices, sometimes one, sometimes two layered together, speaking words Pritchard could not understand. He contacted the district office by radio. Supervisor Kress suggested the line might be compromised by whether snow load on the poles could cause grounding faults or bleed through from adjacent lines. The phone company was short-staffed due to storms. Earliest repair was scheduled for Monday. Pritchard accepted the explanation. It was reasonable. Mountains did stranger things to electrical systems all the time. At 1700 hours, he locked the front door and prepared to shut off the lights. His hand was inches from the switch when the phone rang again. He hesitated, then answered. The line was clearer this time, less static, cleaner tone. What he heard was not a single voice, but several, layered, overlapping, as though multiple people were speaking simultaneously, but not to each other. They were all male. They all seemed agitated. But their speech, fast, fragmented, remained indecipherable. Then beneath the overlapping voices, another sound emerged, a low hum, mechanical or electrical, but unlike any line interference Pritchard had heard. It rose in pitch gradually, peaked, then receded again in a rhythmic cycle that felt biological rather than mechanical, almost like a slow pulse. Pritchard hung up and left immediately, locking the station behind him. He mentioned the calls to his wife that night. She suggested notifying the phone company, but he said the district would handle it. The next morning, Ranger Ann Costello, 34, arrived for the day shift. Pritchard briefed her, advising her to log any repeat calls. Costello had been with the Forest Service 8 years experienced, composed, not easily unsettled. She treated Pritchard's report with seriousness, but no alarm. By mid-morning, the phone rang twice. Both times, Costello heard only static. No voices. But at 1300 hours, a longer call came through. Costello later described it in her written incident report. The voice was male, clearer than any previous transmission. Clear enough for her to distinguish words, but not enough for full sentences. She wrote down the fragments she recognized. North Ridge, something following, can to reach them. Her report noted voice strain, ragged breathing, signs of exhaustion or injury. She asked the caller for a location. He did not respond to her questions. He simply repeated phrases, broken, looping, as though trapped in a feedback pattern. Then the call ended abruptly. Costello immediately contacted district headquarters. Supervisor Martin Kress drove to the station with a technician from the phone company. They arrived at 1500 hours. The technician tested the line from inside the station. He found nothing. No grounding issues, no breaks, no vulnerability to weather interference. The equipment functioned normally. Signal clarity outside of the anomalous calls was perfect. At 1630, the phone rang again. This time, Kress answered. His later report, filed 3 days after the incident, provides meticulous detail. He wrote, "Voices plural consistent with a distant radio transmission. Fragmented speech, no clear identification. Sounded layered, non-responsive to direct questions." He attempted to communicate, asking for names, locations, nature of emergency. The voices continued uninterrupted, overlapping with the same rhythmic hum Pritchard had reported. After 30 seconds, the line fell silent. The phone company scheduled further diagnostics for the following week. They tested the line at the junction box, the distribution point, and the main office. No anomalies, no crosstalk, No frequency bleed. No mechanical explanation. The case was classified as unexplained, logged, and left open. The calls stopped on February 16th. There were no further incidents, not that winter, nor the next. The phone line was replaced during routine maintenance in April. The old equipment was boxed, labeled, and stored. In 1980, it was discarded during a facilities upgrade. But some details lingered in personnel memory far more stubbornly than in paperwork. In 1991, when Kress retired, he sat for an informal interview conducted by a young ranger compiling oral histories. He spoke about fires, storms, floods, rescues, budget crises, and staffing issues. Then the interviewer asked about strange incidents. Kress paused a long time before answering. He said he had worked in the Forest Service for 32 years. He had heard coyotes mimic human voices, radios pick up distant frequencies from Nevada test ranges, maintenance crews swear they'd seen lights in uninhabited valleys. He dismissed most of it as natural or misidentified, or the result of fatigue and isolation. But Carson Pass in February of '78 was different. He said, "Those voices didn't sound like they were calling for help in real time. They sounded like they were calling from somewhere that had already happened, or somewhere that hadn't happened yet. And they were trying to reach us anyway. The station is still in operation. A new phone system, digital lines, better insulation. Rangers rotate through daily. Calls come in questions about road conditions, avalanche warnings, trail closures. But those who worked there in February of '78 share a quiet habit. They hesitate a moment before answering the phone. Just to listen. Just to make sure. Because none of them forget how the voices sounded not as though they were speaking to the station, but as though they were speaking past it. Reaching for something, repeating phrases that didn't line up with any known emergency. Voices that seemed to know the line was open even before it rang. And the hum beneath it all rising, falling almost like a heartbeat not tied to any living thing in the room. Farther south, in the high basins near Mammoth, Ranger Michael Torres was about to discover that some trails were walked once and never walked back again. It was February 14th, 1978. A morning that began with a kind of crystalline stillness only the High Sierra in deep winter can produce. Ranger Michael Torres, 42, had been in the Red Lake Basin for just over 24 hours, midway through a 5-day solo patrol cycle. His assignment was routine. Check 2 remote cabins, survey avalanche paths, verify trail markers, and document snowpack conditions along the loop road. Torres was no stranger to winter isolation. An experienced mountaineer and 12-year veteran of Sierra backcountry operations, he moved through frozen terrain with an ease that came from thousands of hours spent navigating steep ridgelines, frozen lakes, and wind-scoured plateaus. His colleagues described him as steady, unflappable, the sort of ranger who could be trusted to remain calm even when storms collapsed visibility or when radios failed in sub-zero weather. The Red Lake Patrol, however, was considered one of the more challenging winter assignments. The basin sat at 8,200 feet, bounded on 3 sides by peaks rising above 12,000. Winter storms often sealed the area from both directions, and navigation required precision. The landscape was a labyrinth of wooded drainages, wind-loaded gullies, and long, silent slopes that could shift from stable to lethal without warning. Torres departed the main station on February 13th, traveling on skis with a 70-pound pack. He logged his departure at 0900, radioed his first checkpoint by midday, and reached the first cabin at 1600 hours. The cabin, a weather-beaten structure built in the early 1960s for summer trail crews, was still sound enough for winter use. Inside were a stove, basic rations, an emergency cot, and a field logbook. Torres radioed his position, started a fire, and prepared a hot meal. Outside, the temperature dropped to -8 degrees. Winds died after sunset. The basin settled into its characteristic winter silence total, heavy, almost tactile. He slept without incident. On the morning of the 14th, Torres left the cabin at 0800, heading north toward Red Lake. Weather was clear, sky cloudless, visibility excellent. He made good time, reaching the frozen lake by mid-morning. The surface of the lake was a smooth, white plain dusted with fresh powder, the sun reflecting off it so sharply that Torres had to adjust the angle of his goggles. He logged the time 1100 hours and stopped to rest and eat. He sat on his pack, facing the eastern tree line. Nothing moved. No wind. No birds. No sign of life. Then he heard it. A voice. Faint at first, so faint he wasn't sure it wasn't a wind, slipping through branches somewhere out of sight. Then stronger. A single word, shouted. Indistinct, but undeniably a man's voice. Torres stood immediately. He scanned the tree line with binoculars, adjusting the focus, sweeping left to right and back again. No, visual, he called out. His own voice echoed over the basin, bouncing off the surrounding ridges. Silence. He waited 5 minutes. No reply. The voice did not repeat. After noting the incident in his field log, Torres resumed his route along the lake's western shore. At 1300 hours, he reached the second cabin. It stood in a sheltered hollow at the base of a ridge, a location chosen to protect it from prevailing winds. Torres unlocked the door, inspected the structure, checked for signs of animal intrusion, and confirmed the stock of emergency supplies. Everything was in order. He lit the stove and prepared to radio his position. But the radio crackled before he keyed the mic. A broken transmission. Red Lake need assistance. Torres keyed the mic immediately. This is Ranger Torres. Identify your position. Static. Then the same voice again, clearer now, though ragged, as if the speaker were exhausted. Below the ridge, can to move. Torres attempted to establish two-way communication. No response. For 10 minutes, he tried to re-establish contact, rotating the antenna, adjusting the frequency slightly, and checking battery output. Nothing further came through. He logged the time, secured his gear, and prepared to investigate. If someone was injured within a mile or two, time mattered. Conditions were stable, visibility high, and he was trained to handle emergencies alone until backup could arrive. He left the cabin at 1500 hours, heading east toward the ridge referenced in the transmission. The slope was steep, the snow deep. Movement required effort. He ascended carefully, probing ahead with his poles, checking for wind-loaded slabs. He reached a plateau at 1540. He stopped, called out. Silence. He continued east, scanning the landscape for tracks, broken branches, or any sign of recent passage. Nothing. Fresh powder covered everything in a uniform layer. At 1600 hours, as daylight began to fade, he found them. Tracks. They emerged from the trees at the base of the ridge, a set of ski tracks, narrow and deep, indicating a person moving quickly. The pattern was unmistakable. Forward momentum, slight edge control, consistent spacing. Torres examined the tracks carefully. Fresh, made within hours. Snow crystals on the edges had not softened or collapsed. He followed them. The tracks descended toward Red Lake, then turned abruptly west. Torres radioed the main station, reporting the tracks and requesting confirmation of patrol logs. The dispatcher replied, no other ranger was assigned to the basin. No SAR teams were deployed. No skiers had permits for the area. Torres acknowledged and continued following the tracks. They led him back to the cabin. He reached the porch at 16:45. The track stopped at the steps. Inside, everything appeared exactly as he had left it. Almost. On the table beside the radio sat an object that had not been there before. A Forest Service shoulder patch, faded, frayed, and discolored with age. The stitching pattern was consistent with uniforms issued in the early 1960s. Torres had never seen this particular patch. He touched it. The fabric was stiff, cold, far colder than anything else in the room, cold in a way that suggested it had been outside for hours, not sitting near a burning stove. He radioed the main station again. This time, he reported everything. The voice on the lake, the broken transmission, the tracks, and the patch. Dispatcher recommended he secure the cabin, avoid further search attempts after dusk, and wait for a recovery team. They would meet him at the lake on the 16th. Torres locked the cabin door. Then he wedged a chair under the handle, a precaution he later admitted was instinctual rather than procedural. He tended the stove and sat awake through most of the night. No further sounds disturbed the cabin. No additional transmissions. No knocks. Only the fire crackling and an occasional shift in the wood beams as temperature dropped. At 0900 on February 16th, the recovery team arrived at Red Lake. 3 rangers, each experienced in winter backcountry operations. Torres briefed them, then guided them to the ridge, the location of the voice, and the track site. The tracks were gone, erased by 2 days of wind and new snowfall. The area where Torres had heard the voice revealed nothing unusual. No broken branches, no gear, no disturbed snow, no sign of a fall. They searched the base of the ridge. Nothing. The patch was sent to district headquarters. After a week of review, Personnel Archives identified the insignia as belonging to Ranger Samuel Cross, who had been assigned to winter patrols in the Red Lake Basin during the winter of 1963. Cross had disappeared on a solo patrol on February 17th of that year. A 3-day search recovered no trace of him, no tracks, no gear, no sign of struggle. The case remained open. Torres completed his patrol on schedule and returned to the main station on the 18th. His written report was 20 pages long, detailed, methodical, precise. When asked whether he believed the voice, the tracks, and the patch belonged to Cross, Torres replied, "I don't know. I only know what I saw." During an informal conversation, he shared one detail not included in the report. When he picked up the patch, it had remained cold to the touch for hours, even while sitting in a cabin warmed to 65 degrees by the stove. He eventually placed it inside a tin cup near the fire. After 30 minutes, it was still cold. He requested a transfer the following year. The second cabin in the basin, the one where Torres spent the night, was quietly removed from winter patrol rotations. It remains standing but is no longer stocked. Rangers pass it but do not stay there. Today, the Red Lake Basin Patrol remains part of the winter cycle, but rangers speak of the area with a quiet caution. Some trails, they say, are walked once and never truly walk back again. And sometimes the forest returns things on its own schedule. Even things that were lost 15 years before. It was February 21st, 1978. Ranger Gary Linden was stationed at a remote outpost near Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. He was 51, a Vietnam veteran, and had worked for the National Park Service for 12 years. The outpost was a small cabin used for winter maintenance checks on the dam and surrounding infrastructure. Linden was alone, as was standard for the assignment. His rotation was 3 weeks on, 1 week off. The night of the 21st was calm. The temperature was 18 degrees. The reservoir was partially frozen, great sheets of ice extending from the shore. Lyndon had finished dinner and was reading by lantern light when he heard a knock at the door. He was not expecting anyone. The nearest road was 6 miles away, accessible only by snowmobile. He looked out the window. A figure stood on the porch, silhouetted against the snow. Lyndon opened the door. The man on the porch was in his 30s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. No coat, no hat. His boots were old and cracked. He looked at Lyndon and asked if he could come inside. His voice was steady, polite. Lyndon stepped aside. The man entered and stood by the stove. He did not warm his hands. He did not shiver. Lyndon asked where he had come from. The man gestured toward the reservoir. Lyndon asked if he was lost, if he needed help. The man shook his head. "I'm looking for someone," he said. Lyndon asked who. The man did not answer. Instead, he looked around the cabin, his gaze moving over the furniture, the shelves, the radio on the table. He seemed to be searching for something specific. After a moment, he looked at Lyndon again. "This isn't right," the man said. Lyndon asked what he meant. The man did not elaborate. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. Lyndon followed. By the time he reached the porch, the man was gone. The snow was undisturbed. There were no footprints leading away. Lyndon stood in the cold, looking at the empty landscape. He returned inside and locked the door. He did not sleep that night. At 0600, he radioed the main station and reported the incident. His supervisor, Karen Moss, listened without interruption. When Lyndon finished, she asked if he felt safe. Lyndon said he did, but he wanted the incident on record. A week later, Moss visited the outpost. She brought archival photos from the Park Service records. One photo showed a construction crew at Hetch Hetchy in 1923. Among the workers was a man whose face matched Lyndon's description. His name was Thomas Brandt. He had been killed in an accident during dam construction on February 22, 1923, 55 years to the day before Lyndon's encounter. Lyndon completed his rotation and returned the following month. He worked the outpost for 2 more winters. He never saw the man again. But he mentioned, in a conversation years later, that the cabin always felt occupied, even when he was alone. The outpost is still in use. Rangers stay there during winter maintenance cycles. None have reported seeing a visitor, but more than one has described a feeling of being watched or the sense that someone has just left the room. High in the northern Sierra, a ranger was about to make a discovery that would redefine what he thought he knew about the forest. It was February 26, 1978. Ranger William Haas was conducting a wildlife survey in the Plumas National Forest. He was 38, a biologist by training, and had spent the winter documenting marten populations. His work required him to check trap cameras and transect lines across 100 square miles. He traveled alone, on foot and on skis, camping in a series of pre-positioned supply caches. The morning of the 26th was overcast, the temperature holding at 12 degrees. Haas was working a transect line along a ridgeline at 7,800 feet. The forest was dense with red fir and lodgepole pine. He stopped to check a camera mounted on a tree at the edge of a clearing. The camera had been in place for 6 weeks. It was motion activated, set to capture images at 30-second intervals when triggered. Haas removed the film cartridge and replaced it with a fresh one. He continued his survey, checking 2 more cameras before returning to his camp at 1500 hours. That evening, he developed the film using a portable darkroom setup in his tent. The first camera's images were typical mule deer, a coyote, a brief glimpse of a marten. The second camera's images showed nothing but wind-moved branches. The third camera, the one from the clearing, produced 37 images. The first 10 images showed the clearing at dawn. Snow-covered ground, shadows from the trees. The 11th image showed a figure entering the frame from the left. Haas leaned closer. The figure was humanoid, upright, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, the arms too long. The image was grainy, the focus soft, but the shape was unmistakable. The subsequent images tracked the figure's movement across the clearing. It walked slowly, deliberately, toward the center. In the 23rd image, it stopped and appeared to turn toward the camera. Haas could not make out details of the face. The lighting was poor, the figure partially obscured by a branch. But he could see the posture, the stillness. The final image in the sequence showed the clearing empty. The figure was gone. The timestamps indicated the entire event had lasted 9 minutes. Haas reviewed the images 3 times. He packed them carefully and continued his survey for the next 2 days. On February 28th, he returned to the main station and reported his findings. The images were reviewed by district supervisors and sent to the regional office. A senior biologist examined them and concluded that the figure could be a bear standing upright, though he noted the proportions were atypical. Haas disagreed. He had worked with bears for 15 years. The gait, the posture, the way the figure moved it, was not consistent with bear behavior. He requested permission to return to the site with additional cameras and equipment. The request was approved. On March 5th, Haas returned to the clearing with 2 colleagues. They set up a grid of 6 cameras and spent 4 days in the area. The cameras captured images of deer, small mammals, and birds. Nothing resembling the figure. They searched for tracks. The snow had been disturbed by wind and new accumulation, but they found depressions that suggested something large had passed through. The spacing and depth were inconsistent with known wildlife. The images were filed as part of Haas's survey report. They were not included in any public documentation. Haas continued his work in the Plumas for another 3 years. He never saw the figure again, but he admitted in a private conversation that he no longer worked alone in that section of the forest. Not because he was afraid, but because he felt, after seeing those images, that the forest was less empty than he had once believed. The clearing is not marked on any map. Haas never disclosed its exact location. The images remain in the Forest Service archives, accessible only by request. They are filed under Unidentified Wildlife Documentation. As winter began to recede, one final call would come through the Sierra Dispatch that would leave more questions than answers. It was March 9th, 1978. The winter was ending. Snow levels were dropping, the roads beginning to reopen. Dispatch centers across the Sierra were preparing for the transition to spring operations. At the El Dorado National Forest headquarters, dispatcher Raymond Cole was working the night shift. It was 2200 hours. The office was quiet. The radio crackled. Channel 7. A voice, faint and distorted, came through. "Dispatch, this is requesting." Cole keyed the mic. "This is El Dorado Dispatch. Identify yourself and location." Static, then the voice again, slightly clearer. "Elevation 9,000, need extraction." Cole asked for a station identifier. The voice did not provide one. He pulled up the roster of active personnel. No one was scheduled to be at that elevation on that date. He radioed again, asking for clarification. The voice continued, as if unable to hear Cole's transmissions. "Storm came in. Visibility 0. Can't find the trail." Cole alerted the shift supervisor. They listened together. The voice was male, young, strained. The background noise suggested wind, heavy and constant. The speakers seemed to be outside, exposed. "We're trying to reach you," Cole said. "Can you confirm your location? Are you injured?" No response. The voice continued. "Not in. Temperature dropping. Lost contact 3 hours ago. If anyone can hear this." The supervisor made the decision to initiate a response, but they had no coordinates, no identification, no clear location. He contacted neighboring districts. No one reported missing personnel. No SOS alerts had been filed. They listened to the transmission, trying to extract any detail that might help. The voice spoke for nearly 10 minutes, repeating fragments of information. "North of the divide. Tried the emergency shelter. It's gone." Then, abruptly, the transmission changed. The background noise dropped away. The voice became clear, calm. "I think I see lights. Someone's coming." Cole asked the speaker to confirm. There was a pause, then a sound like the mic being moved or adjusted. "Yeah, they're here." The transmission ended. Cole tried to re-establish contact. Nothing. They monitored Channel 7 for the rest of the night. No further transmissions. At 0600, the supervisor filed a report and contacted all Sierra districts. No one had sent a response team. No one had reported a rescue. Over the next week, every ranger station, every outpost, every active patrol was accounted for. No one was missing. No one had been at 9,000 feet on the night of March 9th. The recording was analyzed. The voice could not be matched to any current personnel. The background sounds were consistent with a blizzard, but weather reports showed calm conditions across the Sierra that night. The transmission was filed as unexplained. It was designated UNK 7803 and stored in the regional archives. Years later, during a Sidwadrahidinibahan records review, a researcher noted a detail that had been missed. In the Forest Service files from 1964, there was a report of a missing ranger. He had disappeared during a March storm at an elevation of approximately 9,000 feet. His last known transmission had been a call for extraction. His body was never found. The voice on the recording from March 9th, 1978, matched the cadence and tone of the missing ranger's recorded check-ins from 14 years earlier. The dates did not align. The technology did not align. But the voice did. Cole retired in 1992. He was asked once, in an interview, if he believed the transmission was real. He said he didn't know what real meant anymore. But he had heard the voice. He had listened to a man asking for help. And no matter where or when that voice came from, it deserved to be answered. The recording is still in the archives. You can request to hear it, but those who do say the same thing. The voice sounds close, as if the speaker is standing right there in the room. And in the final seconds, just before the transmission ends, you can hear something else, a sound like footsteps, approaching. The Sierra Nevada remains vast and unforgiving. Its winters are long. Its silence is deep. The rangers who work there understand that the mountains keep their own counsel. Some events are documented. Some are explained. Others simply become part of the record, preserved in static and ink, waiting. The winter of 1978 was not unique in its harshness. But the calls that came through that season, the transmissions and encounters that filled those cold months, left a mark on those who heard them. Not because they were afraid, but because they had spent their lives in those mountains and thought they understood them. And then they learned that understanding has limits. The files remain open. Some have been closed for lack of evidence. Others remain active, awaiting information that may never come. The recordings are stored in archives across California, accessible to researchers and historians. But they are rarely requested. Those who work in the field know the stories. They do not need to hear the tapes to remember. The Forest Service continues its work. Rangers patrol the high country every winter. They check the stations, monitor the weather, respond to emergencies. The protocols established in '78 are still in use. The radio frequencies remain the same. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the snow is heavy and the wind is still, a transmission will come through that cannot be explained. It is logged, investigated, and filed. Because that is what the work requires. The people who experience these events have moved on. Some retired, some transferred to different districts. A few remain, still working the Sierra, still spending winters in the places where the calls originated. They do not speak of it often, but they remember. The tracks that ended at the creek, the light rising over the valley, the voice asking for help from somewhere time could not reach. These are the stories we tell because they were documented, because someone heard them and wrote them down, because in the silence that followed, there was a need to preserve what had been witnessed, even if it could not be understood. If you or someone you know has experienced something in the wilderness that defies explanation, something that was documented but never resolved, we want to hear from you. These accounts matter. They are part of the record. They remind us that the landscape we think we know may hold depths we have yet to measure. The winter of 1978 ended in April. The snow melted. The roads reopened. Rangers returned to their summer